Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 294. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about going to some tropical volcanic islands with a Spanish flair as we go to the Canaries.
Cathedral, I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into this week's interview, I do have three news stories for you. In the first one, Cathay Pacific has had to put off a ad campaign that they had planned because of a scandal that has occurred in a Chinese language newspapers where photos of flight crews engaging in sexual acts were published online. They put off the ad campaign because the tagline was, "Meet the team who go the extra mile to make you feel special." And then speaking of special, there was a flight recently that had an unusual occurrence. Flight 223 departed from Boston on its way to LAX when there was a woman who had a medical emergency, and so they had to divert and land in Louisville. After 3 hours on the ground, they took off in Louisville without that passenger who'd been taken off. But there was an odd bump as they took off, and the Louisville airport officials told the plane's crew that one of their tires was still on the runway. And so they had to make a second emergency landing, this time at LAX. That is a bad travel day. And then speaking of what could have been a really bad travel day and is probably a really bad idea, a California man faces up to 20 years in prison because while drunk, he broke into the control room of a cruise ship and deployed the anchor. Now, that may not sound like a really big deal, but the cruise ship was actually cruising. And fortunately for everyone involved, the anchor cable was too short to hit the bottom, and so the ship did not come to a sudden and possibly catastrophic stop. But the man is still facing what the government says is a felony, and his lawyer, his own lawyer, just says was felony stupidity. For links to all three of those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome back to the show Gary Arndt from everything-everywhere.com, who's come to talk to us about the Canary Islands. Gary, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And for those of you who don't know, Gary and I do, I'd like to say every week, another travel show called This Week in Travel, although Gary's been traveling a lot, and one of the places you've been is the Canary Islands.
Yeah, I just got back. I was there for about 2 weeks, about a week ago.
And where are the Canary Islands, for those people who don't know?
They are off the coast of Africa. I think they're next to Mauritania or Western Sahara, Morocco, that area.
I'm certainly sure that for most people, saying they're right off the coast of Mauritania really helped them narrow in on where it is on the map. So we're talking about just off of West Africa.
Right, in the Northwest Africa.
And tropical.
Yeah, I would say the first thing that struck me when I got off the plane was how much the weather was like Hawaii. And I've heard a lot of people call it Europe's Hawaii.
And it's interesting because we were just talking about the Azores, but the Azores being a lot further north than that, more temperate climate. So here we are in the tropics, and we're in a area that is a territory of Spain?
No, it's a part of Spain. There are two provinces.
It's a province, okay.
That the Canary Islands constitute part of Spain. One is capitaled on Grand Canaria Island, and the other is on the island of Tenerife.
Okay. And having read some of your blog posts about the Canary Islands, I do know that they're not named after birds.
Correct. They're actually named after dogs. And I don't think the exact origin is known, but it was either from people landing on the Canaries and seeing the people there with large dogs, or it came from the Latin word for seal, which is actually a sea dog.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But either way, it is almost certainly comes from the Roman root word for dog.
And that also implies that they've been known for a while.
They were known for a while. The Greeks knew about the islands, but no one ever really did anything with them. It wasn't until the conquest of the Americas by the Spaniards that the Canaries were taken seriously, because they were basically a stopping off point. In fact, when Columbus discovered the Americas in 1492, his last stopover was actually on the island of Gomera in the Canary Islands.
Excellent.
And there's actually a well you can visit where he got water, the last water they used before they did the crossing, and it said that that's where the New World was baptized. Or drowned, depending on your perspective.
Depending on your definition.
Yeah.
So why should one go to the Canaries?
Most of the people, they get a lot of tourism. But almost all of their tourism comes from either Spain, the United Kingdom, or Germany, basically Europe. And it mainly has to do with flights, because it's much easier to fly there than it is from, say, North America. And there are no direct flights currently from North America other than Miami, which I think those are only in the winter. But it offers a wonderful climate. Unlike, say, the south of Spain or the north of Europe, it's not hot, it's not cold. The temperature is always very moderate. You occasionally will get warm winds blowing in off the Sahara Desert, and times where it may be a little bit hazy because this is suspended sand. But each of the islands, and there's 7 main islands, have a very different character. And like I said, it's a lot like Hawaii, not just with weather, but the fact that these are volcanic islands, and they're active volcanic islands as well.
Now, you described one of the islands as having no trees at all.
Yes, I was on 5 of the 7 islands, and one of the islands I visited was the island of Lanzarote, which is the northeasternmost island. And they had some volcanism as late as, I want to say, about 100 years ago. But basically, the entire island is just volcanic rock, and there are no trees, no natural trees. I mean, there's some palm trees that have been placed there, but for the most part, it's completely barren.
And that applies to me that we're talking about an area that's drier than Hawaii.
This part of the Canaries is very dry. And the reason why Lanzarote and I think also Fuerteventura are so dry is because they don't have very high mountains.
Got it.
Places like Tenerife have very high mountains that basically block the clouds.
Yep.
And so on one side of the island, it's very green. The other side of the island is very dry.
Okay. So you have the windward and the leeward part of the island.
I should mention the interesting thing about Lanzarote is even though it's totally barren, they have agriculture. And the way they do it is they use the volcanic rock that has such a high surface area because of all it's so porous that it actually captures the fog and the mist and it precipitates it out. And so they're actually able to grow crops in this, even though it's extremely dry.
Interesting.
Yeah, and they have vineyards. And unlike normal vineyards, like if you go to like wine country in California, you see all these very long straight rows of vines.
Right.
These have semicircles around the vines to prevent them from the wind because the wind is so strong. And they all grow separately rather than together. It's kind of interesting.
And what would you recommend for an itinerary to see the Canaries?
The two main islands would be the island of Grand Canaria, which has the great big white sand beach, and the other island, big island, would be Tenerife. And those are the capitals of the two respective provinces that make up the Canary Islands. And it really depends on what you want in your vacation. Because the islands are so different, there's a lot of very different things that you can do. So if you want, for example, to hang out on the beach, then parts of Gran Canaria or Tenerife are your best bets. Those are the most touristy ones. They have the highest population. I believe there's 800,000 people on Gran Canaria and a few more than that on Tenerife. If you want a smaller island with some more nature, La Gomera has a beautiful national park in the middle of the island. I want to say only maybe 20,000 people live on the island, much smaller, very mountainous, very picturesque. The island of La Palma is extremely green. It's the greenest of the islands by far. It has some of the world's largest telescopes on it, including the Gran Telescopo Canaria, which is a 10.4 meter telescope, which is currently the largest in the world, as well as several others from various European universities.
So optical telescopes.
Oh, optical, infrared. They even have a gamma ray observatory there, which is neat because they have to act extremely quick when they see a gamma ray burst. So there's no dome around the telescope. So you can literally just look right into the mirror, these gigantic mirrors. And it's kind of neat.
Interesting. So you mentioned beaches, and are they nice beaches, or nice by European standards, or nice by Australian standards? Or
yeah, the white sand beaches, for example, on Gran Canaria are extremely long, extremely broad, and very similar to kind of, a lot of people compare it to what you may see in, say, Rio. Like, what is it, Ipanema? Or Copacabana, one of those two. So it's a very nice beach. But on some of the beaches, say La Palma, there are no beaches at all. And what beaches you do have are black sand beaches.
Interesting. And how about the diving, since you're a diver?
I did get a chance to go diving. I was supposed to originally. But again, it depends on which island. Just like in Hawaii, the diving on the big island is not necessarily the best if you're looking for coral because there's so much recent volcanic activity. So you're going to see different islands depending on, or like in Gran Canaria, there was a very defined reef you could see very, very clearly, not far from the beach, which also made the beach very good because you didn't have large waves. But I don't think it's best known for diving because of its volcanic nature, but there is diving available.
Okay. What was your best day?
I would have to say it was probably either on Tenerife when we visited El Teide, which is the highest point in Spain. It's the volcano in the middle of the island of Tenerife, and also El Teide National Park. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. In addition to the peak, there's a gigantic caldera in the middle of it. And as you drive up to the national park, you go through this zone of pine trees. And there are things called canary pines, have extremely long needles. And the needles basically are designed to take water out of the atmosphere and put it into the ground. It's so foggy, and there are so many clouds on the island that's where most of the water comes from. In fact, most of the water in the Canaries does not come from desalinated water. It comes from springs. So El Teide was really beautiful. And the other would probably be on La Palma when I got to actually go up to the telescopes. I thought that was just amazing.
Okay. And with the Canaries having the long association with Spain, do they feel just like Spain, or how different do they feel from?
Yeah, it's Spain.
Okay.
While it is geographically, I suppose, part of Africa, there were native peoples that were on the island, but they were basically either conquered or through intermarriage, they just became part of the population. And I saw some studies that say that genetically there are bits that you can find in the native Canarians today that are, you can tell they're descendants from the original population. The biggest immigrant group actually has come because of its position kind of between the Americas. A lot of people from the Canaries went to the New World. So Venezuela, Cuba, and actually the city of San Antonio were founded by people from the Canary Islands. And a lot of those people came back to the Canaries after the Cuban Revolution, after Hugo Chavez came to power in Venezuela. And so you'll find in some cities in the Canaries a very large population of people from either Venezuela, Cuba, Colombia, different places in Latin America.
Interesting. No, it makes sense that they'd have a long connection there to the New World. So you were there as a guest, as I recall, of the Spanish Tourism Board.
Yeah, it was kind of, they arranged it so it was part Spanish tourism, part Canary Island tourism, part the various islands. So kind of when I was on one island, I would work with them, and then they would pass me off to the next island and kind of go like that.
Okay. And I certainly got the impression that you loved it. So anything we say from this point on needs to be put in that context.
Well, it gets millions of tourists a year. I mean, this is like talking about, like I said, Hawaii or Florida or something like that.
But were there times they were trying to get you excited about something that you couldn't really get excited about?
You know, I think that they did a pretty good job. I mean, I travel enough where I don't get excited about going to the beach or, stuff like that. But there were some very unique things that I saw that I was really glad I did. One was on the island of Lanzarote. Mm-hmm. They have a national park. And in the national park, so it's a rather recent volcanic eruption. And there you can visit a restaurant called El Diablo, which is the devil.
The devil, right?
And what they did is it's very, very close to the surface of where the magma is. So they have different things, like they have this pit, and it's just a pit. There's nothing in it. And they toss hay into the pit, and then it just bursts into flame because it's so hot inside. They have another where they dug a hole and they just dump a bucket of water down the hole, and it instantly turns to steam and just shoots up. But the coolest thing is the food is actually cooked over a volcano. So they dug a hole, and I want to say it's like 9 meters deep. It's just a big hole, and they have a grill over it, and that's where they cook their food. And I think it's 400 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
Very hot.
Celsius, okay.
I mean, literally, I wanted to look down the hole, which everybody tries to do, but it's so hot that you can't hold your face there for more than a second.
Interesting.
So I can say I ate food over a volcano.
I know when I was at the Big Island one time and there was surface flow from the vent there that we stood 3 feet away from magma, from lava. And it doesn't take very long in a rainstorm for lava to dry you out when you're standing that close. So, interesting. And where did you stay?
I stayed, like what islands or?
What islands and also what accommodations?
There's a really nice hotel on Tenerife I stayed at. It was the Grand Hotel Bahia del Duque Resort. And it's really nice. I mean, this is 5-star. And they have the staff that works there is dressed in traditional Canarian outfits. And it's an enormously big resort. And what it reminded me of, and I told the general manager this, it reminds me of the resort where they shot the television series The Prisoner in the 1960s. Okay. Sure. You know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. Where it's not like a resort. It looks like a village. So all the different restaurants are in different buildings, and you walk through it, and really beautiful.
Interesting. Now you say traditional Canarian attire, and even though I know we've said the Canaries doesn't have anything to do with birds, I've got a mental picture that I'm sure is not accurate at this point. What is traditional Canarian attire?
They kind of just had like a vest. I mean, it really didn't look too much different than what you might have seen in any village in Spain or something.
Okay.
I'm not an expert on traditional dress, but like breeches and vests and stuff like that.
Okay. And to get around from island to island, ferries?
Depending on which trip you're taking from which islands.
Okay. So there are inter-island flights as well.
Yes, but you can take ferries. So I went from Tenerife to La Gomera to La Palma, all on ferries. And then I think you can also go from Lanzarote to Fuerteventura to Grand Canarias via ferry. So it is possible. And they have very fast catamaran ferries. You can take your car between them. So in theory, you could rent a car and go between the islands.
Okay. And you talked about one of the islands being less populous. My understanding is there is a significant population on the major islands.
Yeah, I want to think it's over the total population of the Canaries is over 2 million people.
Okay.
So it's not tiny, but it's mainly on 2 islands. It's mainly on Gran Canaria and Tenerife.
Okay. Who is the most memorable Canary? What do you call the people from Canary Islands?
That's a good question. I think Canarians.
Who is the most memorable Canarian that you met?
My guide that I met in Gran Canaria, who took me around, He was just this older Spanish gentleman and just knew absolutely everything about the island. He'd lived there most of his life, was really just great at telling stories. And he knew down to the plants which species were endemic to this island or that island or were just endemic to the Canaries. Just a huge source of information. We had a dinner, or lunch, I should say, at the top of this one volcano on Grand Canaria. And the traditional food they have are these very small potatoes.
Okay.
They're a white kind of potato, very small, boiled in salt water, and then they have two sauces, mojo sauces. One is a red and the other is a green, and they're also used on fish. And that's sort of what you'll have on most of your meals in the Canaries.
Now, Spanish food is very different from Latin America food. It tends to be a little more subtle flavors, a little more mild, not the spicy flavors. But you're in a tropical area. Does the food change at all from the rest of Spain?
There is some influence from Latin America, and I should say the Latin American influence, I think, in some part comes from the Canary Islands. The sauces I was just describing, the mojo sauce, you'll find mojo sauces in Latin America, and that originally came from the Canary Islands, although the Latin American ones tend to be more spicy.
Okay. So it's kind of a step in between the two.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's a good way to think of it. The thing to remember is that the Canaries were basically settled concurrently with the Americas.
Right. Interesting.
So everything dates back to about the same time. There's another World Heritage Site, the city of La Laguna in Tenerife, which is basically a colonial city, very similar architecture to what you're going to see in Spanish colonial cities in the New World.
Now, you mentioned predominantly British tourists, German tourists, and I think you had one other country there.
Norwegians, people like that. Well, in Spain, obviously, yeah.
When you go to the south of France, you find whole towns that are British and whole towns that are German, as if you had never left the motherland or the fatherland. Is it the same way in the Canary Islands? Are there little enclaves where the British tourists hang out and little enclaves where the German tourists hang out? Or is it a little more integrated? I'm not sure what the right term is.
Basically, yes. When I was in Tenerife, I was listening to the radio in a car, and it was a British radio station.
Okay.
I mean, everything was in English. You can find local English language newspapers. There were several bloggers and people online who contacted me while I was there, and they were pretty much all British expats.
Okay. And that's more true on Tenerife than you'd find, for instance, on some of the smaller islands.
No, even in Lanzarote I saw some. But yeah, obviously the bigger islands will have some more.
Okay.
But my guides on the island of La Gomera and on La Palma were both German.
All right.
They had lived there for decades. And the way they described it to me is that many of the guides who do group tours or individual tours actually tend to be either British or German because they're more likely to know a language other than Spanish.
Interesting. So finish this sentence for me. The person who should really go to the Canaries is the person who loves what?
Something different.
Okay.
I think that if you're an American, you can have an experience very similar to what you'll have in many Caribbean islands or Hawaii, a tropical vacation, but Americans simply don't go there. And the reason, I think, is just because the flights.
Sure.
If there was a direct flight from New York, I think you'd see a lot more Americans because it really doesn't take that much longer than, say, going to Aruba. And a lot of Americans go to Aruba. If you're European, the Canaries probably are not as exotic of a location. It's probably, for them, maybe going to Hawaii. It would be the same thing. It takes a long time to fly there. And just as an idea, the flight time from, say, New York to Barcelona was 9 hours. And then it was another 3-hour flight from Barcelona to the Canaries.
Okay. Interesting. As we start to wind this down, what do you want everybody to know before they go to the Canaries?
One, that they exist.
There we go.
No, because literally I've talked to people and it's something they kind of have heard of before. Someone told me that there was an episode of The Simpsons where Bart frees a canary and he goes, fly free to your home in the Canary Islands. And the bird goes out the window and then the bird comes right back, goes to a globe, spins it to find where the Canary Islands are, and then leaves. So yeah, it's European. They use the euro. They speak Spanish, part of Spain, but it's off the coast of Africa. And that it's, it has a solid tourism infrastructure. So it's not like you're going to a third world country. It's like you're going, like I said, to the Caribbean or any other place that has a very well-established everything's set up for tourism.
So it's a bit like going to the south of Spain, but with better beaches.
And better weather.
And better weather, okay.
Because you don't have
Right.
the extreme heat that you do in Andalusia. So I was originally supposed to go to Andalusia. I didn't end up going. Everyone I talked to in Spain just rolled their eyes and say, oh, it's terrible to go this time of year. But when I said I was going to the Canaries, everyone just sort of like, oh, you'll really enjoy it. Hell of a great time.
Interesting. One thing that made you laugh and say only in the Canary Islands.
Probably would have to be when I saw them growing their food, especially on the island of Lanzarote. I mean, nothing grows there, yet there's agriculture. And I would see these vineyards, and they look absolutely nothing like a vineyard. And that was, I just thought hilarious that they would even bother to grow wine, yet it works.
Interesting. And finish this sentence. You really know you're in the Canary Islands when what?
You see a sign that says, welcome to the Canary Islands.
I've
been wanting to say that on this show for a long time.
We should say, for those people who don't know, this is Gary's fourth trip on the show, so he knows how the questions are going to be. The first time Gary came on the show, he came to talk about Micronesia, the Federated States of Micronesia, and the second time, actually, I don't know the order of the other two. I think the second time was the
Gulf States.
The Gulf States, and the third time was the
UNESCO World Heritage Sites.
Right. And so this is the fourth time. So if I made you answer that question again.
When you get off the plane, you hear everyone speaking Spanish, and the weather is just really nice. It's not too hot. It's not too humid. Like I said, the only other place where I've really experienced great weather like that was Hawaii.
So it sounds like it also has the trade winds.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And just like Hawaii, you'll see really different types of climate depending on what side of the island you're on.
And I'm going to guess, and this is just a guess, that the trade winds there are coming from the southwest?
Nope, the northeast.
Okay, wow.
Because it's kind of a big circle if you think of the North Atlantic.
Right.
So the Gulf Stream.
Gulf Stream goes up and then comes out. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and then it hooks back down.
Yeah, okay. I should have known that. My Coriolis forces and all that. Okay, if we wanted to summarize the Canary Islands in 3 words, what 3 words would we use?
Dry,
Okay.
cloudy, and green. And I realize that those are kind of contradictions.
They
but
are
that,
indeed.
that kind of sums up the island. They have a weather pattern that they call the burro's belly because it's always gray. That's kind of how it was on parts of the island when I was there, because these clouds pile up against the mountains and they just stay there. But on the other side of the island, it'll be completely sunny.
Sure.
So you can basically find whatever weather you want on any island at any time of the day.
At least on the ones with the peaks.
Right.
Yep. Excellent. Well, Gary, thanks so much for coming back on the show and helping us find the Canary Islands on the map.
Well, thanks for having me again.
I am sure we will have you again. In fact, Gary has an idea for another show, so we may have him back on soon. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
In news of the community, let me put to rest one rumor started by our guest, Gary Arndt. Gary was asked recently how he knew me and how he had gotten a start together on This Week in Travel, and he related the story that I was his lieutenant back in Vietnam and that he had saved my life and therefore I owed him, which is why we were doing the show. That story not being true, I do have to wonder if there's anything you should believe about what he just told us about the Canary Islands. In other news, I had an interesting comment from John on the episode to Travel to Northern Iraq, who said, just a quick clarification, there are no U.S./Western chain hotels anywhere in Iraq. In this part of the world, it is common for local hotels to use names like Holiday Inn or Intercontinental, Sheraton Inn, etc. to make them appear to be connected with a Western brand. Northern Iraq is beautiful, just be careful. Interesting to know. Thanks, John. I did not know that. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions or any rumors that you would like to start, feel free to leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com or drop me an email to host@amateurtraveler.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Chris2X. And as always, thanks so much for listening.